what's the status of the virus, the underlying virus? If 99 point some odd % of those who are getting sick from Omicron, the variant, which is like the flu, why are we sending our kids to school and demanding that they wear masks? We don't demand that they wear masks if they get the flu. And even Omicron is not that present among young kids. So what is going on here? There's nothing but confusion. Don't you guys agree? There's nothing but absolute buffoonery.
This is where freedom reigns.
If you believe in America, if you believe in the Constitution empowers us. It's a new day. America's back. America's back, and America's going to get strong again. We're going to defend America, and we're going to defend our interests.
Liberty's voice, Levin TV.
Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Levin TV. Well, we found a good one for you to begin with, folks. This is body cam footage captured by this brave police officer who goes on a very dangerous mission here on the ice to save a dog. Let's check this out. Go ahead.
This police officer threw off his equipment and leapt into action to save a dog that fell through the ice.
The dog's going to be about 50 yards out. Hey, John.
Officer Smith didn't waste...
Because once that dog goes under, it's not coming up. There you go.
The dog fell through the ice 50 yards from shore and had already been in the water for 10 to 15 minutes.
Gee whiz.
Officer Smith removed the rest of his equipment.
This is a brave
and ran
man.
Towards where the dog fell through. The distressed owner had called the fire department for help, but Officer Smith got there first. Without hesitation or rescue equipment, Officer Smith cautiously made his way towards the dog, monitoring the condition of the ice as he walked. The 10-month-old Labrador ran away from her owner, chasing geese, and fell in where the ice ended and the water began.
What's the dog's name? Kona. Dog's name is Kona.
The semi-frozen lake held Officer Smith's weight until he reached Kona. And he successfully pulled her up on the ice.
Come here, Kona.
Kona could safely be reunited with her owner, who was immensely grateful for Officer Smith's brave actions. This officer went above and beyond the call of duty.
Most do.
Risking his own life without hesitation. Such an amazing act of courage and selflessness.
Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Two of my favorite things here, dogs and police officers. I'm telling you. That's a tearjerker. And you do wonder what's, the situation with the dog. Now, I'm sure the dog's perfectly fine, but I mean happy and the owners are thrilled and so forth, because most dogs, I don't know, they can't survive that. That's a long time, and they go under the ice, and this officer knew it. They slip under the ice, and they don't come up. So God bless that officer. All right, folks, very serious business in Europe right now and in Southeast Asia, the South Pacific, actually, with China. And I believe China and Russia are coordinating what they're doing. And as pointed out by the Daily Mail, nearly 64,000 U.S. troops stationed in Europe could be deployed to the continent's eastern flank if President Biden makes such a call to counter growing Russian aggression at the border with Ukraine. Now, during the course of my discussing this article, you're going to see various very important charts that you might want to check out. The USS Harry S. Truman has already been placed under NATO command for the first time since the end of the Cold War, while 40 warships, 175 aircraft, 90 tanks situated throughout Europe could also be readied for conflict. I remember when we had like 1,500 or 2,000 tanks in Europe. I'm quite concerned that we don't have that many tanks in Europe, quite frankly. Biden has ordered 8,500 U.S.-based troops to stand ready to deploy to Eastern Europe, while military officials have presented him with a plan to send 50,000 more if the security situation deteriorates and Russia launches an invasion into Ukraine. Here's what they're concerned about. Ukraine, yes. I mean, that's a very big deal. But as we talked about the other day, Ukraine borders 4 NATO allies, 4 of them. And the concern is, once Russia gets ahead of steam, are they going to stop? Now, you might think this is kind of a flight of fancy. No, it's not. This is the history of Russia. It's the history of Germany. It's the history of these various regimes in Europe. And we have to be prepared for that. As I speak, there seems to be a split among some of the European countries, and a split in addition among them with us. And you can imagine which countries are getting cold feet. One of them goes by the initials of Germany. And Germany has been a big problem for a long time, you know, with the oil pipeline it insisted on. It's just very, very stupid to be dependent on the Russians. Biden announced the other day that whatever oil or gas, that Russia cuts off, we will supply. We don't have the capacity to supply that. Biden diminished our capacity, and we don't have the capacity to get it there. So I don't know what the hell he's talking about, because he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Let's go on. At the same time, the U.S. told families based at the U.S. Embassy it's Kiev, but now it's Kyiv, or Kyiv. Just changes. At Kyiv to go home due to the continued threat of such an attack, the State Department said. Though the number fluctuates due to changing withdrawals and deployments, the U.S. had about 175,000 troops stationed abroad as of September 2021. A total of nearly 64,000 of those service members were stationed in Europe. The U.S. has about 750 military bases across 80 countries. But you can see how over time, Biden, the Democrats, and other administrations have depleted our force structure. And we have the protectionists in our own country, whether the Bernie Sanders of the Democrat Party or the Bernie Sanders wing of the Republican Party, isolationist wing, and there is some history of conservative isolationism in the 20s and in the 50s. Very, very damaging. You can see that they've had an impact. Well, you know, we don't need to go to war with Ukraine. I mean, with Russia over Ukraine, what's in it for us, and blah, blah, blah. We're not seeking to go to war with Russia in Ukraine. And Biden has already said we're not sending troops into Ukraine to fight the Russians. What he's trying to do is strengthen the NATO countries in and around Ukraine, particularly very close to Ukraine, hoping that the fighting doesn't bleed over, because that capacity exists. Now, I talked about this the other day, and I want to emphasize it now. My concern is that while all this goes on, Communist China is looking at Taiwan and other areas where it can stretch its wings. And you can understand that if we have forces aligned against the Russians, and if our navy's also pulled because of China and Taiwan, that this could be a huge problem, particularly considering that we're not structurally prepared for both. I mean, that would really cut our forces thin. This is why you build a military up for war to prevent war. Joe Biden's provocations also with respect to Afghanistan and Iran, the enemy takes note of this. Afghanistan is self-explanatory. We spent many days on this, and you saw it with your own eyes. In Iran, people do not realize what's going on. Iran is playing the United States for fools because they know we have one as a president. They are literally months away from having nuclear weapons. They already have ICBMs, and this is becoming a huge problem. Iran has loaded up Hezbollah and Hamas with weaponry, and the Hutus in Yemen, who have been attacking Saudi Arabia, destroying Yemen, the horrific genocide there, and now missiles being fired into the UAE, which is an American ally, which is one of the best of the Arab states, and but a very small Arab state. You know, it has a small monarchy there. You may recall that they were part of the Abraham Accords 2 summers ago. All of this is going on, plus the inbred Un over there in North Korea has fired off 3 missiles in the course of a few weeks and talks about the ability to do more. So again, they're all coordinating. Iran is selling oil to Communist China. They're not supposed to be selling anything to anybody. And Israel has a very weak leadership structure right now. Even though they're very concerned about what's going on, It's not Netanyahu. And as a footnote to Netanyahu, have you seen how those cases have crumbled? They don't have any cases against Netanyahu. They've concocted phony cases. Then they discuss the potential of a plea deal. And part of the plea deal is he can't participate in politics for 7 years. So he and his family said, no, we're not going for that. We're not jumping into that. All right, so this is a huge problem. You could see the charts. You could see what's going on. And, you know, you would think Congress would come together right now, agree to expend emergency funding for additional forces or whatever extra forces we need, not just to send a signal to our various enemies and adversaries, but also to actually fund them. That is, American forces. But instead, they're still chasing Donald Trump. They're still navel-gazing. They're still trying to push through their Voting Act, and they're still trying to push through the massive inflation bill, redistribution bill, by using salami tactics, cutting piece after piece after piece. When we come back, the Wall Street Journal has a very, very good piece on the Omicron has killed certitude, which is basically a piece on the decline of science. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The politicization of science has been a problem throughout mankind's history, to tell you the truth. Some geniuses have lost their heads over making suggestions based on science that happen to be true, but cut against the politics or the beliefs of the day. The Earth is not flat, and things of that sort, that there is, in fact, gravity. Many of the great geniuses of the medieval period, they didn't last as long as they should have. Well, the same thing's happening today without the losing of the head, although the consequences are dire for hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Americans and citizens all over the world. And that is, again, the politicization of science. We just saw this with the FDA and Fauci and others with the monoclonal antibodies. Florida has been focused on these therapeutics now for a long time. They've done a very, very good job. They have been proven to help people. I've talked about my own case, so I won't bore you again, but after I got the virus, first I took Johnson & Johnson, then I got the booster, then I got the virus, and then I got monoclonal, and then it went away. And I speak for hundreds of thousands of people who have used this monoclonal and have had the same impact. And that's the trial. The trial is the hundreds of thousands of people who have improved. And if you're not going to use it or something like it, then what are you going to use after people get sick and the virus and the vaccines on the virus don't work? So they're still pushing the vaccine. And oddly enough, does this vaccine work to kill Omicron? Nobody knows. The answer seems to be no. And that seems to be okay. Why? Because Omicron is not a killer variant of the virus. As a matter of fact, it seems to kill the virus itself. People get sick, but not deadly sick, or they don't even know it. The South Africans told us about this as it broke out there first. But Fauci and the FDA and NIH and the HHS bureaucracy wouldn't believe them. But the difference between the head expert there and Fauci is the head expert there, the woman is actually a doctor who practices in the private sector. And she made the point, it is not deadly. And yet we cut off travel from South Africa and other places, and it's not deadly. So we had a period of time here where the Biden administration, when it came to monoclonal antibodies, took control of the distribution of that therapeutic when Florida was using it, and slashed the amount of monoclonal antibodies. They come in these vials that Florida could use. So Florida went to court, and Florida started fighting them. And now, the other day, the FDA just cut it off. Cut it off based on what? A study. What kind of study? A study done by individuals whose study is not approved by any kind of trial process, a study that has not been peer-reviewed at all, but the FDA used it to kill the monoclonal antibody distribution and use in response to this virus. Fauci went on TV and said, good, I support the killing of it because we don't know if it has an effect on the Omicron variant. on the Omicron variant. And then he says, get this, 99% or more of the people who are getting ill are getting the Omicron variant, and that's not going to kill them. So, and I thought to myself, and I said this on the radio, so then why do you need the vaccine? Why are they still pushing the vaccine? I don't get this. Why are they still pushing the vaccine if the vaccine deals with Delta and what came before on the virus, but not the Omicron variant, which is, he says, affecting, when they have an effect, it's 99% of the public's affected by Omicron and not the other. Right? So why are we pushing the vaccines? But we have to cut the monoclonal antibodies, he says, because we're not sure if they work. What the governor of Florida says, DeSantis, who is a brilliant man, a Harvard graduate, who studies the data every night in Florida, pulls his experts together, his surgeon general together. They look at all the studies worldwide and otherwise. And he said, there's no perfect answer to this. But it seems to be working, at least in many, many instances, in the state of Florida with almost no side effects. And he says the federal government's relying on a study that's not peer-reviewed. There's been no trial, and they just cut it off, which is going to affect the lives of the people of Florida. So it has shut down about 24 of their centers. Now, again, I will tell you, I had this virus. I don't know what variant I had. I didn't much give a damn. And this is after I took the vaccine twice. And I was pretty sick the first day. I don't mean deadly, but I was very sick. Like I had whacked by not just the flu, but the flu times 5. And then I immediately took this monoclonal. It was available for free. It was available at a location about 20 miles from where we have a home. I immediately started feeling better. It wasn't psychological. It's an antibody. And it worked. Now I've had the vaccines, I have natural immunity, and I can still get this stuff. And so how good has the FDA been? How good has the National Institutes for Health, including Fauci's little infectious operation, it's multi-billions of dollars? How good have they? They've been lousy. They've been horrible. Let me ask you another question. If the concern now is Omicron, and it's not even that big of a concern, what's the status of the virus, the underlying virus? If 99% of those who are getting sick from Omicron, the variant, which is like the flu, why are we sending our kids to school and demanding that they wear masks? We don't demand that they wear masks if they get the flu. And even Omicron is not that present among young kids. So what is going on here? There's nothing but confusion. Don't you guys agree? There's nothing but absolute buffoonery. 99% are getting Omicron. So why pushing the vaccine? Why are the unvaccinated responsible for anything at this point? You look at the state of Israel. The state of Israel, they're on their 4th vaccine shot, and they're no better off than anybody else. And there was an Israeli expert, a scientist who's a practicing doctor, who said about 3 or 4 weeks ago, Omicron is going to be the answer. And everybody, what's he talking about? He said, because Omicron is going to basically devour the underlying virus. It's about as bad as the flu. It's not a killer. And so we're going to be through the pandemic. Now, I read that out loud on the radio program. Nobody else talked about it. Certainly not Fauci. Now Fauci is saying, well, we cut it off, and they should have cut it off because we're really talking about now Omicron, not Delta, not the underlying virus itself, but Omicron, which is like the flu. Okay. Can somebody make an announcement and say, we don't need the vaccines? But they're not going to do it. So I wanted to point this out to you. And this is why I think the Wall Street Journal is talking about the decline of science. It's the politicization of science by the left. They use these things to exploit. They've used this to spend trillions of dollars, hundreds of billions that didn't even go towards fighting the virus. Hundreds of billions that went to critical race theory, that went to the teachers' unions, but apparently didn't go to improving these buildings or anything of the sort. The amount of waste, fraud, and abuse has been historic. It's unparalleled. The stories are, rare. They pop up from time to time, but that the kind of money that's being spent and the kind of characters and the crooks that are involved in spending it is just beyond description. It's beyond imagination, actually. So let's take a look at this piece. Go.
After 3 years of living with COVID-19, the only thing the public's been fully immunized against is what they're being told by the voices of public authority.
We have over 100,000 children, which we've never had before, in serious condition, and many on ventilators.
Well, that's not true. We have not had 100,000 children in serious condition in U.S. hospitals. According to the CDC,
COVID pandemic is changing many behavioral patterns, but one of the biggest, for which we should thank the virus, is the death of official certitude.
When should I get tested? Why can't I find a test? Do I need to isolate 10 days, 5 days, or even at all?
The way this administration rolled out boosters was a disaster. You created skepticism and mass confusion.
By now, the public has been left numb, with few believing what politicians or the CDC say about COVID and Omicron. The answers they give no longer add up.
Do you know how many of the 836,000 deaths in the U.S. linked to COVID are from COVID, or how many are with COVID, but
now
they had...
Stop there. I have been asking this question since mid to late March of 2020. Because when I went to the CDC website and I saw how they are collecting the data, the questions they're asking doctors and hospitals and other places, they made it abundantly clear that they were creating an ambiguity, an overlap. If anybody died and they had COVID, they were counting it as dying from COVID. When I brought this up, I was attacked by Soros's front group, Media Matters, and others for downplaying the virus. I wasn't downplaying anything. What's in it for me to downplay a virus, or like downplaying a hurricane, or downplaying a drought? I'm not downplaying anything. I just couldn't come to grips with what they were asking, and then the charts that they were putting on your monitors, your TV monitors, every single minute of the day. Which charts are missing now, aren't they? Because Biden's president. And if they apply the same standard, more people have died under Biden than Trump. We can't have that, can we, ladies and gentlemen? Go.
Comorbidities. Do you have that breakdown?
Those data will be forthcoming.
My purpose isn't to discredit public authority or science. We need both. It was public authorities who cleared the regulatory path for Operation Warp Speed, which let private sector scientists develop protective vaccines.
Now, President Trump told me, and he told the country during 1 or 2 interviews, public authorities didn't clear the path. He had to whip them in the shape to clear the path because it's loaded with red tape. That's why the development and acquisition of these kinds of vaccines literally take years. And in his case, took 9.5 months. Go.
Political interference, no bureaucracy, no red tape. It's been just an incredible, visionary approach.
My intention is to resurrect the idea of intellectual modesty, a necessary virtue.
How about intellectual integrity? That would be
to
good.
Public life and its scientific representatives.
What happened during this pandemic is that many politicians outsourced their responsibility to the public to public health people.
Including Donald Trump.
Including Donald Trump. And the consequence of that is that the normal checks that would allow you to say, well, the politician made a good choice or not, have been offloaded to a set of people who have no checks at all.
You know what troubles me, and I like Peter Robinson, he's an old buddy of mine, including Donald Trump. Donald Trump's situation, not to be a special pleader, was extremely unique. This hit the whole country between the eyes. And instinctively, he knew immediately that certain things had to be done to limit travel from China, to get some vaccines, to get some therapeutics, to get the ventilators, to get the masks, and he moved into warp speed mode. And who was he supposed to rely on? The Department of Energy? Who was he supposed to rely on? It's not like there's a bunch of experts out of these colleges and universities who are already formed and in existence to talk to. He had to rely on the public officials of the federal government, as we all would. But then things got out of hand, and then he pulled back, and then he tried to whip them in the shape, And then he pushed for Operation Warp Speed. I had people who sat in those meetings with Vice President Pence, people I know, some of whom are friends. And they told me the resistance that the Trump administration would get from the bureaucrats, including Birx, including Fauci. And there was a lot of disagreement because they were so cautious and they wanted to take it. Where the administration said, we have lives to save here. No, and it was the administration that kept pushing it. They weren't trying to substitute their knowledge of science, that is the president and the others, which like the rest of us is minimal in this respect, with that of the so-called experts. They were trying to get the information from the experts, the data and the statistics, and make rational decisions. So that's why when somebody says they relied on the experts, including Donald Trump, that's not the whole story, certainly. And we brought on this program, we brought on my Fox program, experts coming out of Stanford and Yale, Rockefeller College, Oxford, and other places. We read that information. We found some sites on statistics that others hadn't found but used. We had a whistleblower call us from one of the nursing homes in New York. I think it was March 4, 2020, about what was taking place in the nursing homes. And we tracked all this stuff down. And I want to tell you, the resistance, no, worse than the resistance, the hostility from big media, the hostility from the New York Times and the Washington Post, and the Democrat Party hit jobs, Media Matters and Mediaite and others, trashing somebody like me who was simply trying to explain what the experts were saying outside the realm of some of this politicized scientific propaganda that we were getting from the bureaucrats, was extreme. And then when you have big tech, that's about the time I resigned from big tech. I'd had enough because they kept putting these, scarlet letters on me, and that's not what this one says. I said, you know what? I'm not in third grade. I don't need them. And there are things going on out there that I have to be free to discuss with my audience. So rather than being followed by millions and millions of people on these phony sites, I'm getting off. We did it long before anybody else, including Rogan, because they're corrupt. More on this. I want to leave it right where it is when I return. I'll be right back. Welcome back. So I want to continue where we left off with Dan Henninger at the Wall Street Journal. But before we do, I want to add another point, and we'll see what he discusses here. A lot of times when we play these clips, I haven't seen them because I want to react to them fresh. Isn't that true, Mr. Producer? Yes. Sometimes I have, most times I haven't. I haven't seen this one. So then you see the mandates, which are been ruled by most courts, not all, but most courts as unconstitutional or illegal. The mandates for the vaccines, the mandates for the masks. And those politicians who have stood up against this said, wait a minute, what are you doing? There's other impacts. There's economic impacts. There's impacts on businesses, whether they can stay open, and employees, whether they're going to have jobs, whether they can put food on our table. They've been denounced. Again, you have DeSantis, you have Abbott, you have Kemp out of Georgia, you have others who dared to think for themselves and look at the data themselves and look beyond this and look at the entire economic and societal conditions of their states and the citizens there. That's why there's this movement now, even among parents and citizens, say, stop masking our kids. I mean, here in Virginia, we have Youngkin, who's been fantastic. And of course, the most left-wing school districts that are owned, paid for, and bought by the NEA and the AFT, the Arlington School District in Virginia, the Fairfax School District in Virginia, and certain schools within certain school districts that are resisting this, they're not following the science. They're a bunch of frauds. I just discussed how Fauci himself said that the Omicron, it's not a killer and so forth, and we don't know if the vaccines work or don't work. They're still pushing vaccines, but they're making little kids wear masks. Wow, follow the science. No, they're following the political science. That's the problem. Let's continue. Go.
The weaponization of science accelerated with the arrival of COVID, but it began with the battle over climate policy.
Climate legislation is infrastructure legislation.
There's the Einstein of our time right there. Don't tell me you can't bartend your way to being the smartest person on the planet. Go ahead.
Disputes among scientists can be intense, but at some point in the last decade, the impatient proponents of climate change enlisted the media to suppress dissent.
You're an expert on modeling, scientific modeling, and of course the models are what drive a lot of the predictions. How credible do you think those models are, and how much uncertainty exists in those models?
There's a lot of uncertainty in the models, and unfortunately, the uncertainty is growing as the models become more sophisticated with each generation.
Social media companies such as Facebook have tried to suppress the objections of scientists and authors like Stephen Koonin. But dissent, perhaps the most honorable of political traditions, is being demoted into oblivion as, quote, misinformation.
There's a reason why it's called COP26. There's been 25 of them before that. We've actually been doing this charade, if you will, for 30 years now. And the UN did a surprisingly honest appraisal of the last decade of climate impacts. What they said was, despite we've had the Paris Agreement and we've had 10 years of talks, we can't tell the difference between the world we're actually in and a world where we hadn't done anything about climate since 2005.
Science is about progress, but it cannot be progress if a significant portion of the population believes that what scientists are telling them about climate and COVID is mostly, to pick a word, disinformation.
Every day you appear on TV, you do more damage than good when it comes to educating the public on COVID.
During the pandemic, too many scientists have aligned themselves with the authoritarians of certitude.
The anger that's developed with you, Dr. Fauci, is that you don't want to give us advice. You want to tell us what to do.
The confusions multiplying around the Omicron variant mean people will continue to disbelieve what they're told to do until serious dissent gets more respect.
The idea that our entire social life can be upended by essentially a relatively narrow set of scientists, a narrow set of public health people, we have to build protections against that clearly in our political systems.
Mm-hmm. The problem is building protections against it in our political system. Isn't that the problem right now with our political system? Isn't that the problem right now with our culture and the Democrat Party? The popularity of the autocrats, the totalitarians, the spreading of American Marxism, the idea which he talks about, certitude, but I would reverse it, the certitude of science. How about the certitude of ideology? People say, well, Mark, you're an ideologue. You believe in the Constitution and liberty. That's not ideology, that's philosophy. There's a difference. Philosophy is a way of thinking that can be adjusted, that should be somewhat flexible, based on certain unflexible principles. Ideology is something that you believe, it's a viewpoint that you press no matter what. So you're still a Marxist after 100 million people have been killed from one end of the world to the other? People are starving to death, they're impoverished, it's corrupt. That's an ideology, I would argue. I'm the only one that makes this distinction as far as I know, but that's how I make the distinction. And it's true. And so I don't see how you're going to have a check on the autocrats in science who work for the federal government when their masters, that would be the politicians, are of the same mindset. When their masters, and that would be the media, are of the same mindset. And so this is the problem. This is the problem I wrote about in American Marxism. It affects science. It affects morality. It affects liberty. It affects basics like the ability to make food and distribute food and eat food. That is capitalism in the broader sense. So it has an impact on everything. The scientists have to step in line and follow the routine, follow the orders. That's what it's all about, and that will be subsidized. I've had experts come on the various platforms and they explain the reason we have more scientists that push this idea of climate change and the sky is falling is because they're subsidized. If you have somebody who says, no, that's not the case, they're a denier, they get the scarlet letter, and they're on their own. And you have somebody like Chuck Todd, and I've now mentioned this in 2 books, who is not a very bright man, quite frankly. He's not a good journalist because he's not a journalist. He's all, with the Democrat Party because his wife is with the Democrat Party. When he announces on his program a few years back that they will not have anybody on their program who is a climate change denier, there are thousands of scientists, meteorologists, climatologists, all kinds of physicists from top schools, practitioners, who take a different approach that, number one, the Earth isn't warming, or if it's warming, it's because of the sun, or if it's warming, there's not a damn thing we can do about it. You saw Bjorn Lomborg there. He wrote a book, and his book talks about, yeah, it's warming a little bit, but not really out of emergency, or out of fear that we should be worried about all these things happening because they're not going to happen. And when you think about it as a practical matter, they can't tell you the weather 3 weeks from now. How do they know what the temperature of Earth is going to be 50 years from now? They don't have the foggiest idea. No idea whatsoever. And the debate on science is more a debate on politics. And the debate on politics is more of a demand of uniformity and conformity than a debate at all. So Ayn Rand wrote a lot of great books, but she wrote The Return of the Primitive, which I've cited, I think, in a couple of books, but I certainly mentioned on radio as well. And she talks about something that's very, very important, this environmental movement. They didn't call it climate change at the time, but she said they've changed their tactics in many respects, but in one particular respect, she noted, they used to say that capitalism couldn't provide for the people. And now they've switched their argument to capitalism is greedy and provides too much for the people of the United States. See the point? And climate change, as we would call it today, or the use of the environment to attack capitalism and to attack the level of living in the United States, has become the tool of the left and the intellectuals. And of course, she was right. And so this whole thing about climate change really has not been set forward in a way where the science can support it. And so what happens is, when you have a debate over these sort of things, big tech is censoring and silencing individuals who don't agree with it. Big media is censoring and silencing individuals who don't agree with it. They character assassinate true experts and scientists who are geniuses, brilliant, from Princeton and MIT and other places, who've written about this and talked about it and said, wait a minute, this is these tests, these models are not correct. They have, a lot of them cannot get tenure. A lot of them lose their jobs. Almost all of them get no federal funding whatsoever. You may say, well, nobody should. Okay, but many do. And many of their publications won't get printed. And you know they're not going to be on Meet the Press or NBC because Chuck Todd announced it. But they won't be on any of these channels. So when I go on radio or here and I say to Chuck Todd, why not have a debate with these people? Since you know so much, and since the experts you rely on know so much, why not allow some of these people with PhDs and beyond PhDs who've written extensively on these matters, debate it? It's just like the virus issue. How many people have you seen on these Sunday shows that have a different view? You'll see now and then a guy from Stanford or this one or that one, but not on a regular basis. Not on a regular basis. So we don't get from our news the kind of information we need. All of it has been politicized, and you notice it's been politicized in one direction, towards more government, less freedom, more power for those who bark out these arguments and so forth, and the dismissal and diminution of individuals who take a different position. I don't know where we'd be if the people who do this to us, who devour debate and competition of ideas, I don't know where we'd be if they succeeded 500 years ago. So what Ayn Rand called this is these are the primitives. Because what she said was, if you are not free to discuss these issues, If you are not free to have a conflict, to have a debate, if you are not free to have competing scientific ideas legitimately, then this is an attack on what? On what? Your brain. Because what they're saying is, you may think something, but keep your mouth shut. You can't test it. You can't promote it. You can't even institute it. Keep your mouth shut. So it's an effort to stupefy people, to dumb down people, and to make them compliant. And that's what some people are resisting. You know, you see a guy like Aaron Rodgers or a guy like Joe Rogan. You see other guys who are attacked, immediately attacked. As I pointed out the other day, these are people I admire, quite frankly, because they speak out when they're not allowed to. I'll be right back. Welcome back. Hello, America. One of the reasons, there's a lot of complexity to this, January 6th is the date that they want you to put on your calendar and print it on every calendar from today forward, is because they do not want Americans protesting at the Capitol, peacefully even, if you object to big government. We don't celebrate the day or the day on the calendar when the New Left blew up the Capitol building in 1971, I think it was, 72. Went back for another shot, 1983, do we? Or 1954 when the Puerto Rican separatists did the same thing, do we? No, I don't think we do. Or the day the Pentagon was attacked and a bomb was set off by the New Left, or the State Department was attacked and a bomb was set off, or a pub in New York was attacked and a bomb was set off, and I can go on and on and on about this, but the good old days, you know. Anyway, I think one of the reasons is they want to discourage people from peacefully protesting. We're going to really expose this in the next week or so, aren't we, Mr. Producer? I mean, big time, and I'm not even allowed to hint yet. We're going to partly expose this big time. There are people who were not in that Capitol building, the vast majority of them were not, who have been charged with trespassing. That's it. Or parading. That is it. How many people went to jail and who spent time in solitary confinement or weren't released until their trial date, who went into the Senate Judiciary Committee hearings on the confirmation of Kavanaugh and disrupted them over and over again? That's the same law. Disrupting the official proceedings of Congress, parading on government property, trespassing because you don't have a permit. None of them. Not one of them that I'm aware of. If they were arrested, they went in the front and out the back, you know, like Antifa and Black Lives Matter. The truckers in Canada have had enough. Canada's not a free country anymore. Canada doesn't have a constitution or Bill of Rights. So smart were our framers, boy. And yet Canada was born out of the same empire in a very different way nonetheless. And so the truckers are being told that they must be vaccinated if they want to drive. And if you're a driver from outside Canada and you're not vaccinated, you're not allowed to come into Canada. Well, you can imagine what's happening to their food supplies and their other products and so forth. But the truckers have had enough. And a lot of the people of Canada have had enough. And you've seen these stories and you've heard these stories where they send in the mounted police and others to take in reverence, to take other people and physically arrest people who don't comply. And you're seeing this in other places too, like New York City, may I say. Anyway, the truckers are fighting this vaccine mandate, and they're going to march on the Capitol in Canada by the tens of thousands and try and shut down that economy. Take a look. Go.
The federal government's handling of rules around truckers and vaccination status is now causing some to blow the horn. Organizers and participants coming from across the West with a strong message.
Drop the mandates across the board for every single man, woman, and child across Canada. We've dealt with this for 2 years. You said 2 weeks to flatten the curve. We're 2 years later.
Earlier this month, Ottawa made vaccination mandatory for truck drivers crossing the border. The U.S. followed suit, which has launched the convoy. Despite the Canadian Trucking Alliance disapproving the demonstration, supporters have chipped in more than $3.4 million for a GoFundMe campaign to help pay for the journey.
It's divisive. We're really alienating big pockets of our population with some of these mandates. And whether it's justified or not, it's hard to say.
This bioethicist says he's unsure whether the science justifies vaccine mandates, but that government communication has ultimately put Canadians at odds. Ipsos polling done for Global News found 2/3 of people believe stricter measures should be put on unvaccinated people. It also found
right there. And that's the problem. This is how you get totalitarianism in so many free countries. 2/3 of the people just go along and they don't want to be bothered. Even in the United States, it's really unbelievable. Go ahead.
I think government should put a health tax on people who are unvaccinated. The Conservative Party leader was asked whether he would meet with truckers when they arrived on Parliament Hill, but didn't answer the question. The new measures ultimately mean up to 26,000 fewer truck drivers are able to cross the border. Aaron O'Toole says that could lead to fewer items on shelves and higher prices.
So we can't have policies that make that even worse, and we can't raise taxes. So that's what we've been advocating for responsibly the last few months.
The convoy is expected to reach Ottawa later this week.
I'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. I only have about a minute. Tiffany Cross is the Joy Reid wannabe, and she brings in these very provocative hosts. And one of them gets on there and says, this isn't a battle, this is a war for, black women need to fight. We've had some victories, but we've had a lot of losses. And this is what Tiffany Cross responds with. Go.
It is a war. It is indeed a war. And I have to say, they have won some battles, Jasmine, but we have to keep our eye on the war, and everybody needs to pick up a weapon and get involved, because this is for the safety.
They're all bobbing their heads like a Joe Biden bobble doll. Let me just say this. I don't know what war they're talking about, but this is a war and everyone has to pick up their weapons. I'm sure she's going to say, I didn't mean any weapon per se. Can you imagine if I said that? This is a war, let's pick up our weapons? What would they say about me? What would they say about any conservative? This is a war, let's pick up our weapons. Did she not say that? And what's the response? Crickets. Nobody gives a damn. Thanks for watching Levin TV. We'll see you next time.